All right, welcome. I'm Pat Cooley. I'm the president of IT Productivity, and I'm joined by Keith Konecke, who leads our awesome service delivery team. All right, so today's focus is really an executive level session for preparing for our 2021 IT strategy. And in the midst of all the challenges we're faced with as leaders, what I'd like you to walk away with today is the idea that the roadmap forward for IT is actually clearer than it's ever been. That the challenges of work from home, increasing cybersecurity, and the other issues that we're seeing are actually very well addressed by the Microsoft 365 and Azure platform that most of our clients are already on, and that it's just a matter of continuing to adopt that to address the issues. We're gonna go into the technology success approach, which is based on a technology alignment process that all of you are used to at some point already. And we're going to emphasize how important it is to have executive engagement in this process and really give you tools and encouragement to get you going. So Keith, walk us through a little bit of what's changing and the effects that it's having on IT.
So the world's been changing rapidly, and there are a lot of moving parts. People are working in different ways. People are connecting from different places with all kinds of different devices, and they might not be fully managed. That introduces new risks, and cyber attackers are fully aware of what's going on, and they're trying to exploit this and take full advantage of it. So cybersecurity measures need to be strengthened up in response to protect your users and your data, and your users also need support through those changes.
So one of the key areas that we want to really emphasize in the planning process is what we're seeing in regards to the cyber posture and the risks that are out there. What I really like about this report, this is a fresh report that just came out from Coalition. It's from the first half of this year, and Coalition is the fastest growing cyber insurance company globally. So these statistics are coming from actual claims. I mean, this is the pain that people actually have incurred already so far this year. And when you look at these statistics, what you see is that the volume is up, but equally the impact of these breaches and cyber incidents are way up. And the two of those combined really drive the rate of risk up considerably. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you see where it's coming from, right? So our old friend email phishing is still very high. And as all of our clients know, I mean, we've been emphasizing and working in protecting the email phishing area very strongly for the last 3 years. And that yet the trends in the overall market are still up. The trends in the client base are actually down or holding steady. So we feel pretty good about that. And then this is just examples. So the idea here is I want to build the context of why this is so important and give you the support. Make sure that you see the statistics that are out there. These are direct reports from different organizations and really emphasizing what's going on with COVID-19. With COVID-19 out there and people working from home, the bad actors are going right at that. So imagine you're a business leader and you get an email from your bank about some PPP action that you need to take. And I know even from our bank, that's not coming from known emails. It's coming from systems. So they're going right at that emotional sense of urgency, and people are falling for them more dramatically. So it's a matter of us building that culture of awareness and having all of our people on guard and training them. So if you're currently in our phishing aware group, you know that we're sending in attacks on a weekly or bi-weekly basis to test users, and it gives them immediate feedback on whether they passed or failed. And then we're assigning training based off that to increase their awareness if they're having issues. And here are some statistics to try to bring it home. I mean, one of the things we run into is this idea that the bad guys are only going after big companies. And the reality is small businesses are being hit way more frequently. They're just more private. They don't have the same reporting requirements as small businesses do. and it just doesn't make as good a news. But look at the costs associated with incidents, even for small businesses, and then look at the percentage of what's being hit, and it's on the rise. So what that brings us to is what we're hearing over and over from business leaders is these top 3 areas, right? How can we be productive, whether we're in the office or remote or whatever changes come in 2021? What do we need to do to be secure? And how can we reduce our cost? And when I think about reduced cost, it's interesting because clients come at me a little bit because sometimes I'm recommending you increase your investment up front in order to mitigate or lower the potential costs of consequences later. And we'll get into this idea of the true cost of IT a little further in the presentation. So with that, my hope was what we accomplished in that setup is to show that the consequences are much higher, the likelihood is higher, and the impacts are big. And now we're going to go into really how do we address that? And as leaders, what can we do to mitigate risk and just have a more successful platform to build 2021 on? So Keith, talk to us a little bit about the idea of technology alignment and how that affects what we call the true cost of IT.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Technology alignment allows us, so with this rapidly changing world, we really need a clearly defined process to allow us to regularly review our environments against certain standards so that we're keeping up with these changes. That allows us to keep productivity up, keep risk low, and also manage costs.
So one of the first steps there is that as business leaders, we need to define the business context that IT needs to serve. And that gets into any kind of regulatory requirements we have, any constraints we have around budget, goals and initiatives. I mean, as we look into 2021, is our staff going to be the same? Are we going to potentially have to reduce or adjust our staffing levels? These are all important things in IT planning. It also plays into why I like the Microsoft 365 and Azure approach, because we're no longer making ongoing commitments to enterprise solutions, which had a big upfront cost. The Microsoft platform, for the most part, is licensed per user per month. So we can move in the right direction, and then we can adjust monthly based on what our actual staffing requirements are. So Keith, how does this tie into the technology alignment process?
So there's a lot of frameworks, compliance standards, regulatory laws that different organizations may be required to conform to and meet for various reasons. It seems very overwhelming. The technology alignment process gives us that process again to review these environments, see where the gaps are, make recommendations, and fill them in. One of these frameworks is the NIST Cybersecurity framework. Pat, would you like to touch on that real quick?
Sure. I like the NIST Cybersecurity framework because it's completely voluntary, and it's a recommendation from NIST of what they believe all organizations need to be doing today to combat cybersecurity and really protect themselves. And it's also a framework that in 2021, if a client is not currently in it, we're rolling it across all of our clients as a standard view. So whether they're fully aligned with it or not, we're going to start giving them a technology alignment report that allows them to understand how they are against these different categories of the NIST standard. And then certain organizations on the phone today fall within categories here. So if you're covered under HIPAA, we have a technology alignment process that will show you your standing on that you can do your business planning around. And the same with FINRA and GDPR and these other compliancy requirements here, if you're taking credit cards, PCI, and such. So here's a breakdown of the NIST cybersecurity framework, and Keith's going to touch on it quickly. But I want to emphasize the idea that this is voluntary. And what we're doing is we're trying to help provide executives with a view to understand security outside technical terms. So Keith, give us an idea of like identify, like from an executive perspective, what does that mean to me? What are you doing in the identify stage?
So really at its core, the NIST cybersecurity framework is broken up into these 5 functions, right? Identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And for identify, what that means is that you just have to know what you have. You have to know who your users are, what hardware you have, your assets, your applications, your capabilities as an organization. Protect just means you have to keep all that stuff secure. Detect is identifying any kind of abnormal, malicious activity in your environment so that you can then respond, mitigate that, and then if necessary, recover from any service interruptions or damage done from the attack.
So Keith, identify something that most organizations are pretty good at, having an asset report, knowing what users are authorized to what levels of data, what departments, applying that against the organizational structure, understanding what applications are allowed in the organization, even locking down and only allowing certain apps to run. Protect is an area that we've been so focused for the last decade. Most organizations are pretty good there too. We've got group policy, we've got firewalls, we have VPNs, we have endpoint protection, virus protection, a lot of pieces in there. Detection is at the core. And what we all really need to do is strengthen our core. And this comes from an idea of zero trust. In today's world, with the type of cyber risk we have going on, detect assumes that there's been a breach. Detect is what tools and processes and practices are in place that are looking internal for things going on that could be reflective of a cyber breach. And what we're finding is that most successful breaches have a reconnaissance period where they've actually made it into the environment, and then they're looking to spread out laterally and do recon on the environment and see what kind of assets and what kind of damage they can do. And during that process, they're planning. And then a lot of times they're going to trigger that over the weekend or at a time where IT is likely to have a delayed response. And that's what makes the detect phase so important and really gets me to this mantra of strengthen the core. And then respond and recover. I mean, these have been baked in for a long time. Certainly the ways we're responding and some of the tools we're recommending for 2021 have matured, and there's some new components in that. But having a good cyber incident response plan and the tools in place, and then ultimately having backup recovery and continuity plans that authorize those actions. Again, something that most of us are pretty mature in at this point. So that brings us to the technology alignment process that we use. These are specific reports that we use in our process. So, a majority of the people on the line today are our clients, so it's certainly something you're familiar with. But I think this applies to internal IT if you're managing IT internally. If you're not one of our customers, or if you have another service provider, you want to look at how they can accomplish this. So Keith, break down. So we've talked about a lot. We talked about all this cyber risk and all these variables, and then we've went into these different frameworks. I mean, how does this bring it together? Because this is what actually is put in front of the executive to engage them into the IT planning process.
So this brings it all together through the use of the standards that we've defined. In the alignment overview, you can see that we have 4 standards here broken up into multiple categories. And throughout those standards in those categories, we're asking very specific questions, yes or no, which provides us with an objective overview. And when we take all of these little questions answered, put them all together, analyze them, it really gives us a comprehensive overview of the whole environment. We can see where things are properly aligned, we can see where risk is, and we can then take the next steps to proactively act and fill in some of those gaps so we can have consistent, predictable results.
So, and to clarify that, on the right-hand side, this is the executive cover page for a TAP report, a technology alignment process report. And in this case, these are the 4 categories that this alignment covered. And as we showed you with the frameworks on the previous page, if you're HIPAA, you'd have a HIPAA category. And what happens is we go through these with some type of rhythm, as should any organization. So in this case, the Microsoft 365 baseline is a quarterly rhythm. The office infrastructure might be an annual or semi-annual rhythm for your organization where you're getting reporting because it's not as likely to change. And the numbers at the top, when you look at 163 that are green, those are 163 specific questions that are coming from best practice or one of those alignment standards we showed. And the way those questions are structured, there's an example of that over here on the left. It says, what is the question? Why are we asking that question, to give it context? And if it's part of HIPAA, it'll say that there. What is the technical analysis? That's where the engineer who does the review is giving specifics on your status and your environment. And then what is the business analysis of that? What's the recommended next step? And that's where the VCIO comes into play. It's really hard to see, but all of that's time-stamped over here in the database. And you can see that Keith did this, and then I came back in and did my component of the review. And on the right-hand side, the BOM means that these fell in the vulnerability category. So imagine as an executive, we've got that many things going on against the framework and 163 aligned questions, 23 marginal, and 46 vulnerable that we're concerned with, which is a pretty concerning score. And it's going to roll up to this executive view so we can get right into the area that's of most interest to you and your business. Anything else on that, Keith?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. So the end result of all of this is that roadmap. Pat, can you talk a little bit about how executives can use that roadmap to help with budgeting and planning?
Sure. So the tool we use for this, all the vulnerabilities that are in there can be mapped to an initiative. And in this case, you see security as an initiative on the left-hand graphic. And then each one of these can be clicked on and open. And as an example on the right, you see that endpoint management is open. And this is explaining endpoint management. And it's got an area down here for the client. So we use this actively in the meeting to either accept, reject, put it on hold, or really declare what we're going to do with that at this point. And then there's a drop down to select the quarter that it's going to fall in. And this is kind of getting it out on the fairway, right? So, we don't always know exactly when we're going to do it, but maybe you want to put it on hold and you don't want to revisit it until at least July of 2021. This tool gives you a very clear roadmap of both the expenses and how they roll up within the quarters. It also rates the risk. It gives you a budget. It's all exportable to a pivot table to support budgeting and planning. And what we're trying to do is take something that's fairly abstract with a lot of moving parts and get it to a dashboard that executives and financial people can understand. Because let's face it, one of the major constraints in IT planning is budget for most of our organizations. So I think this tool has really dramatically changed. We started adopting this approach earlier this year, and it's made it a lot easier. And again, it's very interactive. As we drag and drop these, it updates all the information, and then you end up with an automatic roadmap that comes out of this. And if this isn't the tool that you're using, we did it in Excel before we use this tool. It can be done. It's more important that the discipline of this type of approach is being taken. Otherwise, what happens is a recommendation comes up. I've seen this a lot. We're meeting with a new client or a potential client, and recommendations were made, and then they weren't acted on, but they got lost. This process is going to put everything in a really clear view of when we're going to move on it or why we didn't move on it, and track both the executive feedback and the technical. So that gets us to the part of talking about what we believe the platform to use to solve these problems are. Microsoft 365 and Azure. And based off that alignment, we know exactly what issues we need to resolve. Keith, walk us through a little bit about the distinctions here and what we're trying to emphasize.
Sure. So these are licensing plans that Microsoft introduced within the past couple of years, specifically aimed at small businesses. Business Basics just gives you cloud services. Standard gives you desktop apps. Business Premium gives you all of the enhanced security tools that you need to meet what we would recommend as our current security baseline. There are also some other more enhanced security features that could be added on top of that, but these give you the basic toolkit that you need to ensure that your data, your environment is safe.
And what that means is that if you're not on Microsoft Business Premium at a minimum, unless you're resolving some of these security issues through other tools, you have major risk. And that, we're no longer looking at Microsoft just to give us web apps, or in the middle here, web apps plus desktop apps. That Microsoft is a major security component in our environments. That what we used to be able to do with Active Directory Microsoft servers on premise can now be provided to all of our people in work from home mode or wherever they're working. We can have that same control down to these desktops, make sure they're encrypted and they're locked, and we'll go into that deeper. But at a minimum, this is a baseline that we can build on, getting to Microsoft Business Premium, and then depending on more advanced features, we may be adding on top of that. So with that, we're going to walk through some of why we believe in Microsoft 365 and why we think it's the right platform. We're going to break it down into some core areas. Productivity is certainly a big part of what's important in 2021. There's no doubt about it. I think part of productivity is making security so easy it doesn't get in our people's way. This presentation is not focusing as much on the productivity side because that is more unique to each organization and where they are. So where are you currently in Teams adoption and SharePoint and OneDrive? The important element there is that when you've moved your files to cloud native in those tools, it resolves a bunch of security issues. It reduces complexity, and it allows these advanced features to be leveraged. So Keith, with that, you want to talk a little bit about, let's break these areas down and go into them a little further.
Okay. So the first thing we're looking at is securing identity and access. That's your first line of defense. You don't want unauthorized users breaching an account, getting into your environment, being able to poke around and play with whatever they need to play with. And if we could advance to the next slide, I would say that the easiest and fastest and cheapest thing you can do to secure your environment is to enable multi-factor authentication. They cite an internal Microsoft study here. I have seen multiple studies. I saw another one from Verizon that all say multi-factor authentication prevents 99.9% of account breaches. Because if you think about it, a person can have your username and password, but if you have MFA enforced, they need something that you have or something that you are, or they can't get into that account.
And the good news is, I believe in our client base, we either have 100% implementation of these important controls, MFA, or we have approval and they just haven't been fully implemented, because we've had some recent approvals for a few. And what that means is that, we're really going to move into these other security measures. So thank you for getting this far on the journey, and let's look at the next steps that are important. So Keith, this is about, as we license up to Microsoft Business Premium, we get a whole new level of what's called Azure Active Directory, which is what clients are used to having from servers and prem, but now we get it from the cloud. Why is that important, and what power does that give us?
So Azure Active Directory Premium gives you the ability to configure conditional access policies. Conditional access policies are incredibly powerful tools for securing your environment. You can get very granular in how you identify these policies. For example, you could, if you have no users outside of the United States, you could configure a policy to say that nobody located outside the United States can even get into your environment. Because if you're leaving those doors open where people don't need to get in, you're leaving yourself open for attack.
So Keith, as I have, as we do, our team's remote, 90% of our clients, people are remote. If those are company managed devices with Azure Active Directory Premium on them, we can enforce automatic lockout, we can enforce multi-factor authentication, we can enforce encryption. I mean, pretty much everything we could do in the office, we can now do at home with these heightened security capabilities delivered through Microsoft. Is that right?
I would say that you can even do more. I feel that Azure Active Directory Premium and conditional access policies give you even greater control than on-premise Active Directory ever did.
So next, we're going into how Microsoft handles cyber threats, such as phishing and data breach, and then giving us visibility into that. Most of our clients, again, actually the same exact group we did these together that have adopted multi-factor authentication have also adopted advanced threat protection, I think in lockstep. So for most of the people attending here, this is already in place. Help us understand, Keith, why that's important. I mean, what is this providing for us that's so critical?
So if MFA was the #1 thing I would recommend in this environment, ATP has to be the #2. The 3 biggest ways that cyber attackers are trying to take advantage of the COVID situation is phishing attacks, using the subject COVID as a lure, links to websites with malicious code in emails using COVID as a lure, and the same with attachments. ATP protects you against all 3 of those. It has advanced defense against impersonation and spoofing, which helps keep your phishing attacks down, quarantines that stuff right away. And then it has extra protections for links in emails and attachments. It will scan links and warn your users not to go there if they're malicious. And it can actually, when it receives an attachment, detonate that and scan it and package it back up before sending it out to the user.
And guys, what I like about it is we're leveraging AI. I mean, what Microsoft's doing here is they have this giant AI capability called the Intelligent Security Graph, which is monitoring more telemetry points at this point than any other organization in the world. And they know what links are safe or not safe. And all of that is being delivered right to your inbox on whatever device once ATP is turned on. So if you go to try to click on a link that's a bad link, it's going to block that. And if it's not a known link, that's where the other aspects come in, that if code tries to come over, it's going to, or if there's a file there, it's going to open that file before you do. The file shows up in your email, but it's a link. And when you go to open it, it's going to open that up in the cloud in a detonation chamber and look at its behavior before you open it on the desktop. So Keith, I know I'm always excited about the security side, but a lot of times what the business leaders are asking me is, well, wait a minute, is that going to slow us down? Is that going to create a hassle? Is that going to block our files? I mean, in real world, what are we seeing there?
In the real world, we're seeing a very minimal disruption, if any. Like you said, Microsoft has these great AI capabilities. They're constantly improving their scanning engines. We see very, very little interruption. If we do see any, it's usually when these things are first implemented. We do user acceptance testing with the users. We identify where we need to tweak policies a little bit, and then we get everything running smooth and safe.
All right, so before Keith's going to go into this a little bit to help us understand. Before we do, I just want to check in. We're almost through the Microsoft side of the stack and why I think it's so important. And it's like this is like my commercial interruption. The reason we're going through all these is I believe as leaders we have a lot of uncertainty we have to deal with in 2021, right? And I believe that IT security is not unclear. I can't promise that we're 100% effective, but I do believe for small, medium businesses that 300 users and below, that this is the absolute right move forward in order to secure your environment and combat what we're seeing. And that this should be the easiest decision we make. And it really comes down to some of the unique organizational requirements and goals and constraints and what your risk tolerance is. But all the things that we've shown so far are kind of baseline requirements. Some of them were our cybersecurity baseline 2019. A few of the elements we just went over were 2020. And then moving forward, now we're getting into some of the new things we're putting in there to combat this for 2021. And this is one of the ones that, depending on your requirements, can really play a key role in protecting information. And it's also one that might not be something you're adopting, right away. And Keith, define DLP. Like, what is data loss prevention? Tell us what it means.
Data loss prevention is basically making sure that nothing that you want to keep within the perimeter of your cloud environment is leaving, or if it is leaving, that it's protected with encryption. If you think about your 365 environment as a building, that building is full of information. There's certain information that you don't want to get out. It's classified, it's sensitive. DLP can scan for certain types of information within documents, within emails like PII, and then can either just, if somebody tries to email it out or transfer it over the web, it can just completely block that transfer, or it can encrypt that information. And it can also alert necessary parties that sensitive information may have been leaked and it should be followed up on and investigated.
So data loss prevention can come with policy groups wrapped around things like HIPAA compliancy or PCI or SOX.
That's right, and many of those rules are already predefined.
Yeah, and instead of just protecting the device, so you have to authenticate to the device, or protecting the cloud location that it's stored on, or even when it's in transit, because all that's already built in. DLP is applying further rules to look for multiple conditions. So if you had a Snowden type event where somebody's trying to download or delete a bunch of data, DLP could step in if you had those policies defined and ask for elevated privileges or additional multi-factor authentication. And it could have a workflow process that reaches out to Keith if Keith is the supervisor, where Keith has to approve that. And it works hand in hand with Azure Information Protection. So imagine this confidential data with Azure Information Protection. Every file is natively encrypted. So that means it's not just when it's in transit, it's not just logging into the machine. If I accidentally emailed an Azure Information Protected document to the wrong Keith, they wouldn't be able to open it. That those files are encrypted all the time, and only the authorized people have access to them. And with DLP would probably block that activity anyway if it was configured properly, right? Anything else here you think is important, Keith?
Just that Azure Information Protection gives you a lot more granularity in protecting your files. You can specify who can access those files, employees, non-employees. You can lock down the files so people cannot edit them or print them. Lots of different protections that you can specify on those files with AIP.
So people are concerned in any way about moving, if they're still on a file server, which we have a component of our client base that are, and they haven't moved their files natively to the cloud. Do you have any question with the safeguards we've went through so far? And certainly if you extended to these, that would you say, I mean, I believe files are more secure on the cloud than they are on a file server.
I would agree with you 100%.
So cloud app discovery. I mean, this is an area where we don't have many clients active in this at all yet. This is the next step. It's not that it hasn't been needed, but let's face it, as we've been getting you to go through MFA and ATP and starting to think about data classifications that's needed for Azure Information Protection. This is that next level. And what problem does this solve, Keith?
So this goes back to that first function of the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? Identify. This shows you the cloud apps that your users are using and their usage patterns. So you could have what they call shadow IT risk, users using cloud apps transferring data somewhere that you know nothing about. This gives you insight into that. You can see where your data is going, where information is going. It can help you find holes, so you have data loss protection policies in place, but Cloud App Discovery is alerting you that somebody is sending a lot of data to Dropbox. That could be a red flag that somebody's moving data somewhere that you don't want it to go, and you can investigate that and cut it off.
And if this capability is activated, we can use it to inform the technology alignment process, to understand where risks are and see where things are. And I know it's hard to see, but if you look in the graphic in the bottom left-hand corner, the discovered apps, it's showing you the applications that your users on managed devices are using And it gives us the ability to block those. So if you don't want to allow Box in your environment, or you don't want to allow one of these cloud applications, or your sales team is no longer supposed to be using Salesforce.com or a certain department, you can totally control what cloud apps. So it takes away this ability for your team to move data in areas that the organization hasn't authorized. And without this, IT has very little insight into what's going on. Keith, anything further on Cloud App?
No, I think that covers it all.
So this gets down to one of the core areas that was part of the cybersecurity baseline for 2020. And one of the areas that I think is super important, I think over 50% of our client base has this deployed. I'd like to see the rest of us get this in place as soon as possible. It's a key component. I think sequentially, I would have addressed this earlier, that Microsoft's got this grouped kind of by the type of security it is and what components are supporting it. But this is one of the areas that's super important. So Keith, mobile application management, mobile device management work hand in hand, but they solve different problems. So before we go into it, at an executive level, what's a really quick explanation of what MDM does versus what MAM does?
So MDM is aimed more at company-owned devices. With MDM, you are registering your device with your organization, which gives you pretty much carte blanche to download data to that device, as long as you are meeting the security requirements defined by your organization, and you give them the ability to wipe all data from your device, basically reverting it to factory defaults if it were to be lost or stolen. Mobile application management takes a slightly different approach and is aimed more at personally owned devices that users may not want to have to enroll with an organization and give them all that authority. Basically, you can only access your data through approved apps, and those apps kind of act like containers that are protecting that data on the device. And if the device were to be lost or stolen, your organization has the ability to wipe all of the data out of those apps, but not touch your personal data on your device.
So I feel like this is a really, really important area. So I just want to go back through that and make sure everybody gets that. So with mobile application management, this is giving us the ability to turn on security for BYOD devices or personally owned mobile phones and tablets that are owned by our team or contractors, whoever we're authorizing. And with mobile application management enabled, we have policies that aren't going to let our corporate data go to any device that isn't compliant, that isn't approved. So if that user is approved to be able to sync email or SharePoint or OneDrive or files to their mobile device, and their mobile device is encrypted, and their mobile device has a passcode, and their mobile device meets other configuration concerns, it'll allow company data within that policy to sync to that device. And if it doesn't meet that, or that employee isn't in a group that gives permission for that, they can't sync company information to non-approved devices. Without this, if your users have a password and a username, you can't stop them from syncing your data on any device they want, right? Unless you have a third-party solution in place, which across our client base they don't. Without this in place, your users can sync your company data from Outlook or SharePoint or OneDrive or Teams to any device, which means we can't control it. It could be susceptible, it could be on an unencrypted device, and that's where we see these data breaches that happen because of lost devices. Anything else on mobile application management, Keith?
No, I have nothing else to add there.
So the big concern in adoption there is that most leaders and your team are kind of concerned about, hey, wait a minute, what kind of control are you giving IT over my mobile device? It's a very legitimate concern. And in reality, when you look at the policies, and it doesn't mean people accept that right away, it's not giving us control over anything other than corporate data. And it's given us the ability to allow or disallow based on criteria on whether we'll let it sync. And then it's giving us the ability just to delete the containers or applications that the corporate data is in, which has no effect on the personal applications and data. Is that accurate, Keith?
That's accurate, and it gives us no insight into any personal information on the device. We can't see who people are calling or texting or whether or not they have Facebook installed. It's your personal device. We're involved with nothing except the corporate data in those apps.
So the way I like to address that concern is that I appreciate everybody's right to make a decision on whether they want to allow corporate information onto their device or not. But at the same time, we have a responsibility not to allow corporate data onto the device if it's not protected. And I think that approach kind of turns the resistance around a little bit. And then there's some good videos and other things that we can do to help socialize that. And we've done some webinars where we can get the users on there and talk them through or walk them through how to do it. Our service desk gets engaged to roll this out. I mean, that's the key. Your IT department, internal or external, should be ready to socialize this idea ahead of time and really present it properly and be ready for those concerns because they come up every time. Mobile device management, on the other hand, I feel is just a natural extension. I mean, it's just like the desktop in the office. IT's always controlled it and managed it and has policies locked down on it. This is a company-owned notebook or tablet or smartphone, and we're going to have full control and policies on that. And it goes out into the world, it's out remote, and we still have the ability to do the things that are needed to keep you safe and compliant with whatever your compliancy requirements are. Anything further on that, Keith?
Nope.
So without mobile device management, all those devices that just went home during COVID, we can't necessarily enforce different policies. We can't remotely wipe. We lose a lot of granular. There are methods we can use for that, but we don't have full control over that process. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is accurate.
So when you pull all that together, there's really 4 main categories that we have to secure. We have to secure identity and access, the right people, right? What are the devices? That's where that mobile app and mobile device management come into play. What are the applications that your team can use? And then what about document security itself? So those different components we just went through, this is how it all pulls back in and secures all 4 of those core areas. Anything you want to highlight here, Keith?
I'd just like to point out, I like the way this graphic handles the security from the outside in. Your identity security, that's your perimeter, that's your access to your environment. Then once your users are in, are those devices secure? They're using those devices to access your cloud apps. Have those apps been configured to make sure that they're securely handling the data? And then finally, the documents themselves that the apps are manipulating have the appropriate protections been put into place there. So it's really a layered approach, and you can see how it all works together step by step.
And really, when you look at our cybersecurity roadmap that we recommend, it starts left to right. We've got to make sure that the identity security is right first, and then mobile device management, and then we're getting into application security, and then DLP and Azure Information Protection over here on the far right-hand side. And I think as a leader, what I would look at is, do I have appropriate investment in identity security? How's my device security? And then start stepping into application security and document security. And I think at a minimum, I'd want to see everybody getting through to application security as soon as possible. And then, not to minimize the importance of document security. And certainly if you have compliancy requirements that drive it, it should have already been, a core component. You need to get into data labeling and classification to do that. So there's a little bit of prerequisite work. It can't just be executed at a technical level without a little more business involvement. So this is it. We're ending with a couple of slides. Just if you're over there thinking, wow, these guys are really pitching Microsoft, and that's certainly true. We're a big, strong believer in Microsoft and its ability to serve this market really well. About a big portion of our client base are nonprofit organizations, 300 users and below. It's a perfect fit. Architectural engineering and construction, perfect fit. You know, you look at professional services and the consulting firms and the DoD contractors. Again, this can scale all the way up to CMMC compliancy requirements. And these stats just show you the scale and size of Microsoft. And again, they're collecting more telemetry and security data points in their cloud, in the intelligence security graph, than any other organization today. This next slide, which is impossible to read, Microsoft created this one, I apologize for it. It really just states that Microsoft, and all these Gartner reports are available, or we could provide zoomed in here. But Microsoft's in the top leading quadrant across all these areas we've touched on today. And the dates down below pretty much show that these, since 2019 or before, they've been in these, you know, leaders in all of these different categories. I love this part, Keith, because we're getting to the part of insight, right? And this is baked in. So even if you don't have a technology alignment process right now, if you're not managed by us, go to your internal IT or go to your current provider and ask them to show you your Microsoft Secure Score, which is Microsoft giving you automatic ratings of how your organization, and it will also compare to similar organizations in other industries. And then Compliancy Manager, which is on the right-hand side, they've got this for HIPAA. They've just rolled it out for CMMC. They've, you know, across the different compliancy areas and frameworks we showed, they have a Compliancy Manager that allows you to track, assess, and update your progress as you're traveling. Anything on this you want to touch on, Keith?
Yeah, I love Compliance Manager. Like you said, it has templates in there for, if you think back to that framework slide, pretty much every single framework on there, you're going to have a template in Compliance Manager that you can plug in, and it's going to just automatically tell you where you're missing points. And another thing I like about it is you can really see the benefit of a cloud managed environment when you look under this graph and you see how many points it tells you that you've achieved versus how many Microsoft achieved. And if you think about it, if you're managing your own data center, that's 12,633 points that you're now responsible for if you're managing your own equipment. So it kind of gives you a little bit more insight into the value that you get when working with a cloud partner.
Yeah, so what's interesting there too is that it gives you some feedback as an executive, and we can look at 78% without understanding all these underpinnings. And as you drill into it, it'll show prescriptive steps you can take to increase that score. Now, as soon as you drill in, it gets technical pretty quick. But I think it creates a good tool to sit between executive decision making and the technical environment to kind of, you know, give you a visual that can translate the conversation. And that really wraps it up. I mean, what we're hoping we did here is really lay out the challenges that we see. I'm hoping that you're in a position at the end of this presentation thinking that Microsoft can address these security concerns, and that in our planning process, we need to look at our business context and what's most important, and put that into the roadmap for 2021, whether that's, you know, deploying in Q1 or where that's going to fall, and that one of the uncertainties we don't need to deal with as a business leader in 2021 is how to handle the cybersecurity challenge, that there's a clear roadmap forward here. The productivity side of it is a little more nuanced. And I think the key there is to think in terms of, if you haven't fully rolled out some of these tools, find a group or a department and some motivated users and allow these tools to kind of incrementally roll out, and then use those as pilots and learn the best practices in your organization. You don't have to go organizational wide at one time. And that brings us in, we're a few minutes over. We had a 45-minute time frame here. Do we have questions? So guys, on my side, I can't see questions. All right, well, thank you for joining us. We will do follow-up. You know, the next steps that are important are, if you're one of our clients, confirm your scheduling for your 2020 Q4 client business review. And if you're not, reach out to your tech team and make sure you schedule their equivalent of that. As business leaders, let's think about the business context for 2021. What are the priorities? Are we giving IT the right information to come in? Is cost constraints our leading issue? How do we feel about these cybersecurity issues? And then that tees us up to look at these TAP reports. So we provide the TAP reports in preparation for these meetings. You'll get all those if you're one of our clients before the scheduled meeting. And then I really encourage you as executives, attend these meetings, help us build out the strategic roadmap that's right for you. And then stay engaged all year long in the quarterly rhythm, because that's what gives us the cadence. We can always push things out a quarter if we're not sure, but if we've got this quarterly cadence, we're just going to continue to get better and more aligned, and IT can do a better job serving you. So with that, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to next steps with you.